I've commented before on Bill Barr chuckling and guffawing about 2,000 mules and talking about the unreliability of geo-tracking, and I don't want to revisit that here. What I hadn't discussed was some further comments that Bill Barr made a little further down in his presentation to the January 6th committee, and I want to read them and comment upon them now. Bill Barr says the other thing that people don't understand is that it's not clear that even if you can show harvesting, that this changes the results of the election. The courts are not going to throw out votes and then figure out what votes were harvested and throw them out. You'd still, the burden on the challenging party to show that illegal votes were cast, votes were the result of undue influence or bribes, or there was really, the person was non-compos mentis. But absent that evidence, I just didn't see courts throwing out votes anyway. So what's Barr saying here? He's saying, look, maybe the vote harvesting is illegal, but who knows who the votes were cast for? And who knows if these were legal or illegal ballots in the first place? And unless you can independently prove where the ballots came from and where they were obtained, courts are not going to throw them out. So my first point is, fair enough. And there is a way to prove those things. In other words, if you go talk to the mules and you arrest the mules, they're going to then fess up and tell you that they got the ballots from the nonprofit organizations. And then if you raid the nonprofit organizations and bring them under scrutiny, they're going to tell you, we got these ballots at nursing homes, we got some ballots at housing complexes where we had the residents sign and we had the ballots then sent not to them but to us. We filled them out. So in other words, there are plenty of ways. Law enforcement does this all the time. They know something is amiss. There's a logical path for them to investigate. They do investigate. So what's remarkable is you have somebody who is the chief law enforcement officer who should know that there's a pathway to answering his own questions. And yet he acts like, well, we're not going to take the first step because we're going to rely on Catherine Engelbrecht, Greg Phillips, and Dinesh D'Souza to produce all the evidence. Are we prosecutors? Are we the people who have the power to raid the stash houses? Are we the ones who can go directly and talk to the mules? No. So the kind of idiocy here of trying to put on us a burden that is actually his burden, which is something he should have done in the first place. Now, the other thing he says is that we don't know who these votes were for, and that, quote, I just didn't see the courts throwing out the votes anyway. First of all, does he know, or does he not know, that in 2018, based upon the identical paid ballot trafficking that was done by an activist, by the way, trained by the Democrats, McCrae Dowless, this is exactly what he would do. Paid ballot trafficking using mules and obtaining votes from the exact places that we talk about in the movie and in my accompanying book that comes out shortly. The result of it was that not a court, but an election board overturned the result of the 2018 election. So let me ask you this. If the 2018 election was overturned due to the identical ballot trafficking that found these votes, see, you don't have to prove who the votes are for. You simply have to prove that the votes were illegally obtained, illegally delivered, and are unreliable. That you don't know that the votes that were cast were in fact cast, let's say, for Biden. And if you don't know, that means they could have gone either way, and that means you can't trust the result of the election. So the point here is either Barr doesn't know what the law is, doesn't know what the precedent is. By the way, there is precedent. There are courts that have considered election fraud, and they've applied something called the but-for principle. There was a case in New York, going back actually to the late 1970s, I believe. Widespread voter fraud was alleged, and the court said, if this fraud can be proven, then it is of sufficient magnitude to overturn the election in New York. And if it turns out New York is a critical state, to overturn any election that depends on the results in New York. So that's the but-for principle. But the court went on to examine the allegations and say that no, in this case, the fraud was had not been proven and was not sufficient in magnitude to affect the outcome of the election. But the important thing is when you read the court's decision, it's really clear that the court is saying that if we were able to find the fraud, and if we were able to establish that it was of this magnitude, then yes, we would overturn the election because the fraud throws the whole outcome into doubt. Now, even if you overturn an election, you have two options. You can have the election again, or in some cases where the fraud is really clear, you hand the prize over to the other side. In the Miami case, for example, where widespread fraud was proven, the court said, we're not going to have another election. Why should we let the cheater have a second shot at winning he lost. He cheated and he lost and he only won because of the cheating. So we're going to give the other guy the prize and we're going to make him the mayor of Miami. And that's what the court decided to do. So I want to point out that Barr here is just being disingenuous. There is precedent, there is legal validity, and there's also investigative work to be done, which this incompetent sheriff evidently did not do.
Stands for freedom, and they can't take that away.